in the Google sheet that I'm sure Joel has sent everyone out. If you have like desperate questions, I guess, that you think you need me to slow down, or like you need me to clarify something urgently, then maybe message Joel directly, and then we can adjust the lecture accordingly. All right. So if any of you, so if any of you have issues with the audio, do let me know also, and I can rectify it immediately. So I know most of you have no idea what to expect, but this lecture is very simple. I'm going to teach you how to cover your own mistakes, how to punish your opponent's mistakes, using an understanding of how people debate and how people view debates, right? So for example, did you know that you can just avoid answering a POI and not get punished for it? Like on multiple occasions in my career, after getting a long convoluted POI from my opponent, I just look at my judge and go, huh? And nobody would think any worse of my speech. And that's because in the moment, I was able to read my judge's face, read my judge's body language, and understand that they didn't get the POI either. So it was pointless for me to try and spend time figuring out what the POI meant and whether I should respond to it or how I should respond to it. So on to the lecture, right? So obviously there are a lot of Sun Tzu quotes, Sun Tzu, I don't know how to pronounce his name, throughout the lecture. But I'll cover like 5 key areas. So what is the psychological aspect of debating and why it's important? I'll talk about exploiting opponent tendencies. I'll talk about how you can understand how judges think and how it can help you become a better debater. Then I'll talk about improving yourself and avoiding common problems that debaters face. And then finally, it's essentially story time. I'll just talk about particular stories where I've applied the lessons either through my own debate experience or the experience of my students, right? So let's just start with the psychological aspect of debating and why is it important. First and foremost, we need to understand that debating is a game, right? Well, competitive debating at least. Debating in the real world or in the workplace or in parliament obviously isn't a game because there are real stakes. You're fighting about real issues. Even debating, you fight about real issues, but there are no real stakes. There are no consequences. Just because it's a game doesn't mean it's frivolous, obviously. It's like any other sport you would take seriously and study. So competitive debating is serious business, even though it's a game. More importantly, it's a game of persuasion. That means it's judged by people. Understanding how people's minds function and are persuaded is critical to winning this game. So if you look at basketball, right, and you understand basketball as a game of putting a ball through a hoop, how you learn basketball will revolve around putting that ball through that hoop as frequently and as efficiently as possible. The same holds true for debating. If we think about the mechanics behind persuading people, then we can learn to do it more efficiently. So if it's a game that we play, beyond learning the rules and basic skills and strategies, there is a mental aspect to any game we play. Because the game isn't between robots, it's between people. So you can weaponize your own or your opponent's mental strengths and weaknesses to win that game. Most of us do this on some level when we play simple games like chess, right? We learn one of the fundamental concepts of chess, just thinking ahead, thinking how your opponents will react. We think about how our opponents will react to a specific move that we make on the board, and we create contingencies for it. If we are playing Risk with a group of friends, I hope people still do play Risk, right? Or in any game, basically, where it's a group and we must attack each other. If you choose to launch an attack against another player, what's the risk of reprisal? What's the risk that you will get attacked back? Are they likely to prioritize strategic attacks, attacking the weakest player on the board? Or are they more likely to retaliate against you for attacking them in the first place, right? So we make these sort of calculations all the time and try to figure out what's going on in the minds of other people that are involved with the game.
Sorry, Reuben, I'm going to have to interrupt you.
So the person who can't hear, try to check whether you have joined the audio for the call. That might be an issue. Yeah. Worst case scenario, watch the video afterwards, I guess. Right, where was I? So we think about what other people are doing all the time in a game, right? Because it's not between robots, it's between people, and that's important. Actually, in every major sport, we have dedicated coaches for scouting and studying opponents and explaining the tendencies of opponents to their own players. We have sports psychologists counseling players and developing strategies to build mental strength and resilience. Some sports teams even go to the extent of analyzing referees to produce like long, detailed reports to discuss blind spots that the referees have. So the players know when they can get away with a foul, right? Somehow all of this is neglected in debate, or people don't think a lot or very heavily about it. We tunnel vision on creating the best possible case, the best possible arguments, the best possible rebuttals, sounding the best, but forget that debates have opponents to deal with, like real human opponents. Sometimes the opponents might not even be sitting opposite you on the debate floor. They might be judging you. They might be beside you. They might be in your head. So we need to grapple with all of these factors in order to understand and to optimize our experience and ability to perform in a debate. So I'm sure by now you have some rough idea about where I'm going, but you aren't super clear about what exactly psychology in debating entails. So it boils down to one simple concept. It's about understanding tendencies. What are people likely to do, right? Of everyone involved in the debate. It can be your own tendencies. It can be your opponents. It can be your judges, the adjudication call, the group of people that creates motions. It can be coaches and teachers of the opposing team, right? It can even be audience members, but that one's a bit niche that applies in like break rounds, like grand finals with a large audience. So it's about figuring out what goes on in the mind of everyone during a debate. When presented with a specific situation or a game state, how will everyone read? What will they do? Once you learn that, you can then learn to manufacture specific situations and to create winning conditions for yourself. So if you recognize that once A happens, right? A can be a specific situation, A, right? If A happens, your opponents will do B, and the judges would then react with X. And X results in you winning. So beyond thinking about what arguments to run, you can also think, how do I ensure that A happens more frequently during my debate, right? So it's a game of figuring out what your opponent is thinking, and that's critical, okay? Does this mean that focusing on the psychological aspects of debating will help me win automatically, right? And the answer is no. You still need competency in basic skills. You need to learn how to construct argument. You need to learn how to string multiple arguments and rebuttals together in your case, how to present them as clearly and stylistically as possible. So all the other things that were discussed in the previous lectures that you watched, and even in lessons by your own coaches, still apply, right? Don't get me wrong. I want to be really clear. Coming up with the smartest case is important, but there are also other things that can help you win a debate. If you happen to only come up with the second or third smartest case, because let's be honest, that happens the vast majority of the time. Because debating is hard, it's stressful. You aren't always coming up with the best possible argument, the best possible response, the best possible POI all the time, right? So if thinking about everyone's tendencies and understanding psychology will not guarantee the win in isolation, absent everything else, why do it? So it's about gaining edges, right? It's about improving your win rate. It's about increasing the odds that you will gain victory when used in conjunction with sharpening your fundamental skills. So it's an amplifier, it's a catalyst, it improves things that already where you have a base level of, right? So it allows you to use to utilize the information you have about your opponent or the circumstances of the game to enhance your strategy. So even if you make mistakes when playing the game, if you can exploit other weaknesses, you naturally will improve your win rate. It happens between teams of similar skill because that is often the sole deciding factor. Who had the psychological edge between teams of similar skill, right? When there's a gap in skill, let's say you are the underdog, it can be used to close that gap and to narrow it to a point where it is possible for you to win. If you are the favored team, it can be used to widen that gap and to make it insurmountable if you are the better team in the debate, right? Gaining edges is extremely important in debating because there is a degree of variance, which is the last thing on the slide. That's why there's nobody with a 100% win rate in debating or sports in that matter. I mean, you can look at the most dominant athletes in major sports. No one really has a 100% win rate. They are bound to lose and lose multiple times. In debates, the opponents, the motion, the judges, your teammates, how you are feeling on that day, so many little random things can affect your odds of winning. So if we try to gain every single edge we can by minimizing the variance here and there, we can increase our win rate in the long run. So the next question is, how are we going to do all of this? Whose minds do we need to analyze? So I'll look at three main groups, okay, because it's just impossible to discuss everyone in this lecture. Your opponents, your judges, and yourself. Okay, I mean, they're teammates and coaches and debate clubs, but we won't cover that for now. So let's talk about your opponents and exploiting opponent tendencies. First thing you need to figure out is what sort of tendencies do they have in general? And there are broad categories for this, right? The first category of tendencies that they might have is strategic tendencies, okay? So this you can think about, what sort of arguments are they likely to run? So this is where you go beyond what is the best case for my opponents to run versus what are my opponents likely to run. You need to recognize that your opponents may not necessarily run the best arguments or the best responses, right? Do they favor specific cases of arguments? And that's a very important question to ask yourself, because debaters reuse cases and arguments all the time. You do this for sure, right? And they tweak the arguments or the cases based on the motion, right? And they try to nuance it to the motion. So depending on their debate or their competitive experience, their lived experiences, what they've experienced in life, their clubs or their coaches' debating philosophies, they are likely to choose particular arguments and run them as a matter of habit, right? So if you can think about what they're likely to run based on how they've behaved as a debater, who they are as a person, who is coaching them, or what they believe in, you can actually try to start guessing what sort of arguments is likely to come out in the debate. Even with responses, do opponents like to, for example, nitpick on policy mechanisms? Do opponents, for example, try to create inflated burdens like, oh, it is your burden to prove this, and then they push their opponents to prove them in the debate? Do they straw man opponents' arguments? So you make an argument, they ridicule it and make it into something else and respond to that, right? Are they prone to like exaggeration or hyperbolic statements? All these things are a function of their competitive experience or the club they come from and their coach, and even the circuit they debate in, right? So in Singapore, in the school circuit, we have specific ways in which debaters tend to engage with one another, right? At higher levels, those ways change. If you compare the school circuit in Singapore to, for example, the school circuit in Malaysia or the Philippines, those response patterns also change, right? So let me just try to give you examples maybe. Like experienced debaters in general are more likely to push burdens than inexperienced debaters. I can't give specific examples here without naming schools, and that wouldn't be nice. But if you observe schools at the Division 1 level, you will actually notice some very unique approaches to debate they are specific to each school because they often rely so much on alumni or seniors to train them. Or their coaches, for example, stay around for a very long time, so they're able to impart a very specific style of debating on each school. All right. So if you compare, like, Raffles is very different from Nanyang. Nanyang very different from Hwa Chong, right? If you can identify what those patterns are, I can't tell you what those patterns are, unfortunately, because some people might take offense to them. Then you can actually figure out the best way to approach whenever you debate against those opponents, right? So next, mental tendencies. So observe your opponents. Ask yourself, how have they been doing during this tournament, right? Are they coming off a loss? Do they have a win streak? How do they deal with losses? Are they prone to panicking during a debate? Are they tilted, right? So in a tournament, particularly when you participate in weekend tournaments, right, where you do multiple preliminary rounds in a day, okay? If it's round 3 or round 4, it's late in the day, and your opponents have been losing, right, or have taken a very hard loss, knowing that gives you a significant advantage because you know your opponents are less likely to perform optimally if they are unable to bounce back from losses well, right? So you know they are stressed out, and that can give you, that alone, that knowledge alone, whether you exploit it or not, that knowledge alone gives you a sense of comfort, right? And makes you a lot more confident in your abilities to deal with them, right? So even if you talk about the concept of tilt, right? So are they tilted? Okay, so this is just copy pasted from like Wikipedia. Tilt is a very simple concept. Basically, it refers to a negative emotional state that affects your ability to make decisions optimally, right? And all of us are familiar with this concept on some level or another, right? So it originated as a poker term, right? Placing an opponent on tilt or dealing with being tilt is an important aspect of poker, and it's an important aspect of any game, right? The gamers who are listening will probably know how to do it, okay, when you try to tilt other people, when we are online by typing, easy game or like question mark after killing them, right? So we won't go into specifics about how to tilt opponents in the debate because it's a bit controversial. And it's very easy to cross a line if you're inexperienced. But the fundamental idea is this. If you know your opponents are tilted, you also know they are likely to make mistakes. So you can look out for those inevitable mistakes happening. If you don't even pay attention to their emotional state, you might not be aware that they're making more mistakes than normal. And as a result, you might not punish them as harshly, right? So not paying attention to their mental or emotional state often means that you miss those opportunities. In addition, I do things like, for this, things that I've done personally when I was a lot younger, and I relied on these techniques heavily. Like if I know my opponents are stressed for whatever reason, I actually make it a point in the debate to look extra relaxed, right? So before the debate starts, when you get into the room, sometimes the judges are filing in, the audience members are filing in, the judges are going around filling the score sheets and the names, right? I look over and my opponents are just like furiously scribbling away, right? And they're very stressed out. I make it a point to like lean back in my chair, play with my pen. I look around, I joke with my opponents, I talk to the audience, I be a bit noisy because the debate hasn't started. No one can really do anything, right? Prep time is ended, so you shouldn't really be prepping very much. But my opponents are like trying to cram everything as much as possible, right? So I look very relaxed and I'm a bit disruptive, and it actually feeds their negative energy, right? They start thinking, I'm stressed. My opponents, why are they so chill? They're making noise. This is annoying, right? Why are they joking with the judges or the audience members, right? I can't concentrate. There's like 2 minutes before the debate starts. And then suddenly they forget what they're supposed to be writing down, right? Because they're so concerned about them being stressed, and it becomes a negative feedback loop, right? Sometimes opponents get super upset over a benign, sarcastic joke that you've made during the debate. Make sure it's not an equity violation. Make sure it's just a genuine sarcastic joke, a witty joke, right? Sometimes opponents get upset about it. Or opponents are even more likely to get upset about it if they've been on the receiving end of those jokes in multiple rounds or in multiple instances against you, right? Sometimes opponents don't like how you POI them if you're very aggressive, right? If you notice that, continue doing the same thing, because that affects their mental state and affects them and affects their ability to perform at an optimal level. And you just watch them get more and more upset, right? If they focus on that, they actually don't focus on making good arguments or making the best possible arguments. So this is where I tell a story, right? When I was like younger, like 17 or so, Viha will remember this time. And only been debating a couple of years. Viha actually know the opponents who I'm talking about. There was this thing where some opponents would do to me where I would offer a POI, right? And they would straight up ignore me. They wouldn't look in my direction. They wouldn't say no, thank you. They wouldn't even wave me down, right? So I'd be standing there, my hand out, point sir, right? For minutes, all the while getting more and more upset and frustrated because I'm being ignored. At first, I thought they just didn't hear me say point of information or POI. So I tried saying it a bit louder, right? It didn't work. They just ignored me. They didn't even look in my direction, right? So there'll be multiple debates where this happened. And I'll just get very angry during the debate and after the debate because I thought they were just being rude. And this shouldn't be happening. But then I realized two things. One, it isn't against the rules to do that. No one says you have to acknowledge your opponent when they offer a POI. And two, all the while I was standing and getting upset, I wasn't writing anything down. I was so desperate to try and get my POI that I stopped tracking their speech, right? I'm not developing my rebuttals. I'm not tracking my opponent's speech. I'm not thinking of additional arguments. So the lesson I learned is that my opponents were doing this on purpose, precisely because it would throw me off my game. And every time it happened, I would lose badly. So if you know something is causing opponents to tilt, or they are already tilted, pay attention to it. See how you can use it, or at least pay attention to the mistakes they make as a result of it. Even if you can't use it, right? That's fine. Pay attention to what they do as a result of that emotional state. Other things about exploiting mental tendencies. Do they underestimate you? Do they think you are a bad team or at least worse than them? Do they think you're a better team? Because that can inform whether they are likely to go easy on you or to go hard or maybe even to give up if they think you are a much better team, right? Are they flexible with their cases and responses? Or do they tend to stick to their guns till the end? Okay. So I have another story to illustrate those 2 points about underestimation and being flexible. So when I was coaching Paya Lebar Methodist Girls' School years ago, so they used to be quite bad in Division 1, right? So multiple years, they would finish the tournament with 0 or 1 win, right? So they didn't break in Division 1. And they've been in Division 1 for a number of years. So when I started coaching them, obviously schools underestimated them, right? Because they have a track record of being bad. And in one of the earliest debates that they had after I was coaching them, right, we were up against a very established opponent, an opponent that had even won Division 1 a few years prior. Okay. So I knew that they were continue underestimating PL. I also knew that they tend to be quite inflexible in terms of dealing with cases. They assume that there's an optimal case and they would prepare to respond to it. So they were opposition and PL was proposition, right? So what I did is I got PL to run a very specific nuanced case that was unexpected, right? And to deliver it extremely strongly and convincingly right from the get-go and to force it down, like make it a big deal throughout the debate, right? So it was a combination of their inflexibility and their underestimation of PL that made us really confident that we could get away with an unconventional case, right? And what happened is you could actually look at the opponents and their look of despair as the debate progressed, because they did not expect this to happen. This was not how they envisioned it to happen. And they got so upset after the debate. When they lost, they actually ended up crying in some corner afterwards, right? Because it was so shocking. It was not at all what they had envisioned the debate to be like. So if you can take the image that your opponents have of you and turn it against them, because it's not something that they envision to occur, you can catch them off guard and make them even paralyzed because they don't know how to react, right? Other things, right? Are they aggressive? Are they passive? Do they try to intimidate other teams? If they're really loud, for example, and they constantly harass you with POIs during your speech, just being aware of the fact that they're likely to do that goes a long way in allowing you to deal with it. So you can even prepare for it, like prepare lines to say during the debate, to tell them to tone it down during the debate, and make the judge aware that they're being annoying, right? So you've essentially now nullified one of the ways they try to win, right? So on the other hand, if you know your opponent is likely to get disrupted by multiple POIs, you can constantly offer them, right? So let me ask like a simple question whether people are paying attention, okay? So you can type in the chat. How long should you wait to offer a POI after being rejected? How long should you wait to offer a POI after being rejected? Okay, people are saying 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Okay, great. So I'm could be wrong. I think the exact rule is 15. So anyway, 15 to 20 seconds, right? So if you think about it, there are some debaters, and some of you might have encountered these debaters. They are trained to always say no thank you when rejecting a POI. Imagine how it would destroy a speaker's speech if every 15 seconds they were saying no thank you. Not only would it be very disruptive compared to just waving you down or asking you to hold on, they will probably get very thrown off as well, because every 15 seconds they can't finish a sentence. They have to say no thank you, no thank you, no thank you, right? And you can throw off a speaker like that or destroy the speech because they don't know how to wave someone down, right? Or tell someone to like hold on, I'll take you in a minute, right? Those are very common things for people to do. Also, if you stand up every 15 to 20 seconds, some people get annoyed. It also throws people off. Even if they don't say no thank you, it can get annoying, right? So that affects opponents negatively, right? Is their team cohesive and united? Are they likely to blame each other for mistakes made during the debate, right? And this is something you know because you either have friends in those teams or in the club, or you just observe them after a debate or after they've lost, right? Will they adapt on the fly and back each other up if mistakes are made? If they aren't, you might want to exploit that by picking on weaker speakers, right? Or who you perceive to be weaker speakers, and focusing on small tensions and contradictions in the case and blowing them up. Because you can watch the stronger speakers get frustrated with mistakes that their teammates have made, right? And then you force the later speakers to defend them, okay? So if their team isn't very cohesive, if they have certain egos, they think they're better than each other, play them against each other, right? Point out instead of directly attacking their case, point out how one speaker contradicts another or how one speaker says something that's slightly different from the other and force them to defend it, right? So what teams sometimes do is they just give up on their teammates, right? And they abandon what their teammates say. Oh, no, that's wrong. Okay? So those are mental tendencies that you can think about. General tendencies. Like, how often do they trade? How hard do your opponents trade? What are the training methods like? How quickly are they improving? Are they stagnating? Why? Why are they stagnating? Why are they improving quickly? So a lot of us have friends in the debate circuit. If you don't, then try to make friends. Having friends is always useful. So you have friends in other clubs, friends of friends, talk to them, right? We talk about other debaters all the time, okay? Don't act like no one gossips about other debaters. So any casual information you get about their training is useful. It gives you a relative understanding of your strength versus theirs, right? And if you understand the skill gap better than your opponents do, you are going to be more prepared for the debate against your opponents, right? So when I would prepare my teams, my students for championship runs, right, I would figure out before the competition long starts who their biggest competition is, who their most likely opponents, who their biggest threats are, and try to figure out how they train. I would keep tabs on like the strongest speakers and how quickly they were improving through like the literal tabs. Like I'll observe like speaker tabs in other tournaments that they were participating in, see the trend of like speaker scores, and figure out, are they improving? Have they been losing? So then what is their mental state and how exactly are they training, right? So I knew as a result of observing opponents and observing other teams and observing these threats, I knew where exactly I had to get my students at in what time period, right? To be even able to compete or to close any skill gaps before the competition, right? So learning about your opponents knows where you have to aim and how good they are and how good you have to be, right? So how do you figure out these tendencies? You watch them debate all the time. As much as you can, watch your opponents. Not just during the time, because the times where you go up against them are a handful over the years, right? But they participate in like 10, 20 different tournaments. If you can watch them, go ahead. As much as I can, I always encourage my students to watch their opponents, especially during SSSDC, right? So you can go into any of the rooms and watch the debates because the rounds are staggered, right? So when you are younger and you are following your seniors around while they compete, right, munching on your snacks in the canteen and watching the seniors get grilled by the coach, don't just sit there and chill. Go into a debate room, watch other schools, particularly schools that are good or like or are threats for your own school in your division, right? While waiting for your seniors' turn to debate, go and watch other teams. So sometimes certain debaters will have participated in multiple prominent competitions, and those competitions were recorded or live streamed, right? Watch the videos if you aren't physically there. So when you debate against them, after the debate, don't just think about how you could have done better, how you could have improved your case, how you could have improved your arguments or your responses. Think about how your opponents behaved during the debate. What arguments they ran, and more importantly, why they ran those arguments. Why did they make those choices, right? If you observe them long enough, you actually start to see patterns in behavior. It shouldn't take longer than 2 to 3 debates to notice these things. And this is actually super easy to do because a lot of you start debating when you're Sec 1 or Sec 2. You see other debaters all the time in your batch for years to come, sometimes up to JC and Poly or university, right? So you're going out against these people for years. Sometimes, I know, you don't have the opportunity to observe your specific opponents. In that case, make broad generalizations based on like observable patterns. So like, for example, what's their social economic status? What school do they come from? Why do I pick these things, right? Because it informs how they live and how they view life, and therefore what they think are compelling arguments. So for example, it's actually significantly harder for students from richer backgrounds to make compelling arguments about the effects of poverty. It's something I've observed for many years, right? So, for example, like a debate about making X free for all. Okay, like X can be anything, can be healthcare, can be the internet, whatever, making it free for everyone. Okay. Opposition often says, presents an alternative of like means testing and helping only the poor. A particular response I've heard multiple times over the years made by such students who tend to come from richer backgrounds is that means testing or helping only the poor is problematic because it's embarrassing to stand in line for government handouts and to go through the bureaucracy of filling out forms. So this is an example of a very academic statement that they probably read somewhere, which is true to some extent, but does not reflect the realities of how poor people generally feel on the ground, right? The vast majority of people, yes, they might want to avoid bureaucracy, but they just want to get help. They are not going to be humiliated to a point where they avoid getting any form of government assistance, and therefore the poor don't get help, right? So it is an academic argument that, yes, it makes sense, but if you know anything about poor people, you really don't believe it or believe it to a significant extent, right? So what if I cannot come up with a strategy to make use of these observations, or I don't know how to exploit them? That's fine. Just observing your opponents and recognizing patterns in behavior goes a long way because you are mentally prepared for what's to come. If you've seen it before, it isn't or is less likely to rattle you during the debate. Like a lot of the stress about debating is just dealing with unknown factors. Not only do you not know what case your opponent is going to run, you don't know how they're going to run it. And you don't know how they're going to attack you. You don't know how they're going to behave, right? You don't know whether you're going to win or lose. So many things that you don't know. If you know more things, you are less likely to be stressed out, right? So that just is useful information, knowing how your opponents debate, okay? So let's move on to the next group of people that we're going to talk about, right? So understanding the mind of a judge. The first thing you need to understand is judges do not want to listen to you. I know this is shocking, right? People are thinking, what? But judges are there to judge me and they are supposed to. They have honor, right? Or pride or whatever. And it's their job. But judges do not want to listen to you. The judge does not like you. A lot of the time, the judge does not want to be there because they would rather be doing something else, right? And often they are judging less experienced debaters than they are, which means that they naturally think the debates are bad and not mentally stimulating. Think about it. Most judges are experienced debaters, and they are judging younger debaters who are less experienced because that allows them to give feedback. So to a judge, to your average judge, the debate isn't mentally stimulating. They know what is right and what is wrong to do in a debate. And you are probably doing half the things that are wrong, right? So if you think about who judges are and why they are there, you can actually figure out why they don't want to listen to you. And they're like broad categories of judges, right? So the first one is like the goodwill judge, okay? The judges are there because the organizers or the adjudication call like beg them, say, please come down. I really need judges. And they ask their friends or people they know how to judge, and they agree out of goodwill, right? These people see it as doing a favor to the community or to the people that ask them, and they don't necessarily care about you specifically, right? So they might not care about your debate. They might not care very much about your arguments. The second type of judge is the only because I'm paid to be here judge, right? And this is one category which I fall into, right? They're only there because there's some form of small remuneration, be it cash amount, vouchers. Lucky cases, they are paid to travel for international tournaments. Again, they would rather be doing something else. They're only here because they're paid to do it. There are people that only want to put it on their CV, right? And these people they are perhaps slightly less experienced judges. There are judges that are inexperienced debaters and they want to learn more about debating, right? Note that all of these categories, they have no incentive to care about you. It's only the last category. I'm super passionate about everything and I'm passionate about judging. and I'm passionate about debate education, right? And those are just like a handful of people. So most judges have no incentive to pay attention to you during a round. The important thing also to realize is that the more experienced a judge is, often the older they are, the more priorities they have in life, the less time they have to be judging kids at a tournament, either because they are coaching themselves or because they have jobs and lives outside of debate. So they actually trade something off in their life to be there at the tournament, judging without getting too much in return, to watch not very mentally stimulating debates. So they have very little incentive to listen to you. We get that, right? And there's at least no way to guarantee that they'll listen to you closely. Why is this important? Because this, coupled with the fact that it is human nature not to pay attention, informs the way we should interact with judges in general during a debate. Okay, so let's try and understand why it's human nature to not pay attention. Humans have limited attention spans. So in the time that you've been listening to this lecture, I guarantee almost all of you have tuned out for one reason or another, multiple times. Maybe you got distracted thinking about food. Maybe you got distracted about thinking about the games you're going to play later. Maybe a notification popped up on your screen. Maybe your friend PM'd you a private joke and you thought it was very funny, right? Maybe you just got bored. Each time you zoned out, it can be between 10 seconds, it can be to a whole minute. Now imagine if your judge is exactly the same way and they zoned out during your speech, because no real incentive to pay close attention, and it's their nature to zone out, right? And if they zone out twice in your speech for 15 seconds, now that's 30 seconds that they were not listening to you. In a 6-minute speech, 30 seconds is 8 to 9% of your entire speech. It's poof, it's gone out the window. It's as if you've never said it. So it's important. You need to recognize that it isn't in judges' nature nor their interest to listen to every single word you say. What then do you need to do about it? Take it into account in the delivery of your speech. Use your style to ensure you're entertaining enough, right? Some of the techniques I assumed were in the first lecture you listened to. Observe the judge during the debate. Like, actually look at their face. When you're speaking, look at them and figure out, are they listening to what I'm saying? If they are not, do something to get their attention. Raise your volume, change your tone, do anything, right? Do a dance. Make sure they are paying attention to you. Look at them, figure out, are they writing down what I'm saying? If they aren't, what are you doing wrong? You are doing something wrong that makes them bored and likely to zone out. So if you don't realize this about judges, and many debaters don't, right? That's when they just go on and on and on in their speech and just look at their script. And judges say all the time in feedback, I didn't get this argument. I didn't understand this argument. Or when you tell the judge, oh, actually I said ABC, and the judge said, I didn't get that. It's your fault. It's not the judge's fault, because there's no reason to listen to you other than like pride and honor and like what they're supposed to fulfill in their role. So that's the first thing I want you to understand about judges, okay? The second thing I want you to understand about judges is that all judges are biased. Everyone. No one will ever admit this, but they are. Everyone prefers something. Everyone prefers certain types of arguments over others. I mean, some judges are good enough that they prefer good arguments over bad arguments. But in general, people have preferences, okay? No argument will work equally the same with different judges. So they prefer certain arguments, they prefer certain styles. Some people prefer certain accents. You might argue that's a bit racist, but that's life, right? This means, aside from thinking about the best possible speech you can deliver, you can also think about what speeches your judges are best able to appreciate and understand. Think about what they like. what they prefer. So how to understand this and how to figure this out is to watch your judges while they debate. So a lot of your judges are debaters themselves, right? And they'll participate in competitions. Okay. If you can make a mental note, okay, I've seen this debater, he runs particular types of arguments. Maybe debater X is very fond of, I don't know, feminist arguments. In every motion, run feminist argument. Maybe it might be useful for you to run a feminist argument. If you can, if it makes sense in the context of debate, right? Maybe debater Y is very passionate about social movements, right? So might be useful to talk about social movements in a debate. Okay. So often the arguments that debaters themselves run and the style they have when they speak actually have significant overlap with what they find persuasive. That's why they debate this way, right? Because they think it's persuasive, that's why they speak that way. And therefore, if you can learn to incorporate those elements into your speech, you can actually increase your win rate, because when these people judge you, they find it persuasive, and therefore those arguments or styles, whatever, go a long way, right? Another way to do this is to take into account feedback that certain judges have given you in previous debates, right? So if you are getting judged by the same person over the course of a tournament or multiple tournaments, think about what the judge said in the last few times that they judged you, right? Some judges really look out for responses or specific types of responses. So for example, if you're responding to a bad argument, let's say you're rebutting a bad argument, okay? There are two schools of thought to responding to a bad argument. One is you could make fun of it, say it's a bad argument, give one reason why it's a bad argument, and just move on, right? Because it's a bad argument, it's likely not to get that much credit. The second approach is to respond to it very thoroughly, to give like 3 different layers of rebuttal, 3 different levels of analysis, right? So some judges might actually want you to give a thorough response with multiple levels of analysis. Some are okay with you giving one reason why it's bad and moving on because it's a bad argument. So figuring out what tendencies your judges have is also useful, because it can allow you to optimize your speech and choose strategies accordingly. Another example, right? So some judges are very liberal with how they differentiate between new analysis and new arguments in third speaker. So if you don't know, if you're a third speaker, you shouldn't be coming out with new arguments, right? And some judges, like, you can come out with new analysis, but you can't come out with new arguments. And some judges are very liberal with that definition, okay? So if they're liberal, you can get away with it if you're a third speaker, okay? And at this point, you might be thinking, wait, Reuben, aren't there rules in place? Like, aren't there rules to define all these things? And aren't judges supposed to evaluate you according to these rules? But what you need to realize is there's a ton of wiggle room in terms of how these rules are applied and evaluated by judges. Judges interpret those rules. You rely on judges to interpret those rules. And understanding the interpretations of those rules can be very useful in informing your strategies in debating. It's also useful to take into account what your judge's experience is, both debate experience as well as lived experiences, right? Because that's another indicator of what's persuasive to them. So a simple example of this is if you use exclusively Singapore examples or examples within a Singaporean context in a debate with a judge that has never been to Singapore and hasn't read much about Singapore, doesn't have very many Singaporean friends, right? It is much less likely that they'll understand what these examples are and why these examples are persuasive or why they're important, right? Sometimes you can make broad generalizations and try to guess if you don't know the judge super well, because you face multiple judges many times over the course of many tournaments. So you can observe them based on their institution, based on where they are from, and then maybe tweak here and there. So for example, in a motion about national service, if I have a male judge, I'll be using a lot more anecdotes and analogies or stories in my speech because the male judge who has gone through national service is going to understand them very easily. If I've gotten a younger male judge who hasn't gone through national service, or a female judge who will never go through national service, I'm not going to rely on those anecdotes, right? I'm going to change my speech quite dramatically. If, for example, I identify that my judge is young and inexperienced, I'm not going to use very complex terms to explain concepts because it's likely it will just fly over the head of the judge, right? So there are a couple of examples of this. In a Malaysian tournament years ago, I teamed up with a friend of mine who's now my partner and co-coach in my business, Alfred, right? So it was an economics debate. I can't remember the specific motion. I think it was something about having savings plans in debates. The judge who walked in, when we saw her, because we know Malaysian judges, right? We knew she was very young, very inexperienced. In fact, it was actually her first time judging a tournament, right? It might have actually been her first tournament, right? And probably she didn't have a very good understanding of economics, okay? So instead of throwing out, so what Alfred did is, instead of throwing out this term, the circular flow of income, which very simply is just how money changes hands and how value is gained out of it, right? He used a very simple analogy. He said, if you look at the prata shop owner, right? Every time you buy one prata and you pay the man $1, he uses that dollar to pay his suppliers, to pay his workers, right? Who then use the money to purchase other goods and services, right? So every time that dollar is spent, there's good coming out of it. And that's why spending in an economy is generally a strong indicator of its health. And that's why spending is a good thing. And that's why we shouldn't have forced savings or something like that. I can't remember what the motion was, right? That analogy went a long way in distilling a very complex economics concept that you might study at A-level econs to someone who does not know anything about it. And that judge found it persuasive and we won the debate, right? Because we could analyze those complex economics terms, whereas our opponents just did not, right? And just debated straight up and talked about very used very technical language, right? So another example of this is one of my students, right? Years ago, they had to debate a complex motion on the financing of political campaigns. So anyone who has any knowledge of US politics knows the problem of corporate lobbies channeling money to politicians through what we call super PACs, right? And that's how they get around campaign financing laws. So we spent a lot of time discussing this in the debate, and it was a very strong case, but we lost, right? And I got very upset. I'm like, how could we lose? It was such a strong case, our opponents didn't even know what was going on. I realized after the debate, after talking to the judge, not only the opponents didn't understand what was going on, the judge also didn't understand what was going on. It was just too unfamiliar. And we have to actually do the groundwork of explaining what a super PAC is and how it operates before even running our arguments. I could say, yeah, maybe the judge was bad, was dumb, right? But could I really blame the judge? He's young, he's Singaporean. How many people at his age would really have read up on campaign financing laws and campaign financing methods in the United States? I can't expect my judge to know that. So if it was, for example, Ting, who not only studied in the US, but is a smart and brilliant debater, I could say the term super PACs and she would instantly get it. So I wouldn't have to bother explaining it. So you need to take into account who your judges are when explaining ideas and concepts and arguments. Okay? So not only are judges biased, they're biased in a different way as well. They have preconceived notions about you and your abilities. So let me give you an example of this. Say whoever won SSDC last year, Nanyang. Okay, so we have Nanyang girls against Changkat Changi Secondary School. Okay, I hope Changkat Changi doesn't have a debate team so they don't feel bad. So let's say we have Nanyang against Changkat Changi. Okay. If you are the judge, you've just gotten your room allocation, you know these are the two teams in the room. Who are you going to expect to win? Nanyang Girls. It's perfectly normal and reasonable to make that assumption. Even if the judge isn't actively thinking about it, it's buried like in the subconscious. If the judge wanted to give Changkat Changi the win, there will be a little voice in their head saying, "Are you sure? Changkat Changi isn't supposed to win. You do know people are going to ask you questions, right? What if you cannot justify your win, giving the win to Changkat Changi? What if people think you're a bad judge?" I'm not saying everyone has those thoughts, but judges do, definitely. And definitely everyone has the assumption that Nanyang is going to win. So it plays into the decision-making calculus of a judge. They might not be aware of it. They might not admit it to be true, but it's there, whether you like it or not. The moral of the story is this. If you are the massive underdog in the debate, you have to do a lot to win. It isn't enough to barely win or to make it a close debate. You have to pull out all the stops to make it as clear as possible, because otherwise people are just not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. They are going to give it to the other team, right? And it's not very nice, but it's the unfortunate reality of participating in a sport judged by people, that people have biases, right? They have preconceived notions of who you are and what your abilities are. The same thing happens in gymnastics, in ice skating, in synchronized swimming. The same thing even happens in regular sports. If anyone watches like basketball or football, you see referees all the time giving favorable calls to the stars of the sport, right? You see Cristiano Ronaldo rolling around on the floor after a tackle. Referee immediately take out yellow card, right? It happens so frequently, and it's just normal for these things to happen. This applies in life, okay? Anytime you're being judged by someone, people are going to have preconceived notions of you and your capabilities. And you cannot say, well, I did enough, I deserve this. You have to deal with the reality that you might have to do a lot more. Maybe you're a racial minority. Maybe you don't speak English all that well. Maybe you came from a worse school. Maybe you came from a worse stream, academic stream. People judge you for that, and it just means you got to work all the more harder to overcome it. It sucks, but the quicker you accept it and the quicker you come to terms with it, the better. So you just need to accept it and try your best. Okay? So that's understanding judging and common issues with judging, right? So now let's talk about you as a debater. So avoiding common psychological traps. The first thing is we'll talk about negative emotions. Okay. So there are different types of negative emotions. Let's talk firstly about the fear of losing. Okay. So there are two types of fear of losing: general fear versus a fear of strong opponents. A fear of losing is ridiculous. Let me tell you why. Because there are no real stakes if you lose a debate competition, if you lose a debate round. Many a times I've seen debaters, my own students, cry after a debate because they get upset about losing, or even the possibility of losing. And that cripples them, because that traps them in this mindset that losing is a terrible thing. Okay? The difference between debaters that improve very quickly and eventually rise to the top is that debaters, those sort of debaters, actually don't care about losing, and they look at losses as just opportunities to learn. And the reason why they don't care about losing is they generally believe that somewhere in the future they are able to win. All right? And we'll talk about this belief in yourself and the belief in ability to win a bit later. But you need to learn to let go of that fear of failure because there are no stakes. If you lose one debate, there is always the next debate. If you lose one competition, there is always the next competition. If you lose SSSDC when you're Sec 4, there's always MIDCs in when you're in JC. There's always interpolies when you're in poly. There are always open tournaments and varsity tournaments. There's always the next tournament. There's always the next debate. You've just lost this one game. Or maybe the last 10, but it doesn't matter. Even if you lost the last 10, think about winning the next one. If you obsess over this fear of losing, what happens? It actually prevents you from doing well. Because you get consumed by that fear of failure, that it prevents you from thinking about ways to win. Right? It actually restricts your ability to focus on just doing the best you can. Doing the best you can in the moment. So this fear of losing is firstly irrational, right? And because there are no stakes, and you should abandon this fear of losing because that is the way to help you win. There's nothing to fear but fear itself. Okay, that's super cliche, but yeah. The next fear is this fear of strong opponents. And this is another thing that I find a bit ridiculous, that you fear people who are stronger than you. I think you should never fear stronger opponents because you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. So if you're going up against a very established debater, that established debater has everything to lose, because if they lose to you in that debate, they have lost credibility. People look at them as a worse debater. How can you lose to such a weak team? They have a reputation to uphold. You don't. No one actually cares if you lose. That's just the harsh reality of it. And you can ask your friends, even think about your own experiences and your own victories. If you have enough of them, you don't actually remember who you beat or how you beat them. You tend to remember the losses because they're painful. So your opponents aren't going to remember you. The judges aren't going to remember you. The circuit, the people in the tournament aren't going to remember you. Because if you lose, that's fine. You were supposed to lose. But if you win, that's big news. Everyone talks about it. It's a big deal. Right? So there's no reason to fear strong opponents. You need to look at it as an opportunity to gain something and to take away something from those strong opponents. The strong opponents don't gain anything. They are already strong. They already have a reputation. Okay. The next negative emotion, anxiety. So again, there are just two types of anxiety: general stress-related anxiety versus clinical anxiety. It is normal to feel anxious. It is normal to feel nervous. It is normal to feel like puking, to have butterflies in your stomach. That's just part and parcel of being involved in, number one, a competitive activity, and number two, a very stressful competitive activity. Okay? Stress is part of competition and you need to learn to accept it. But ways to get around it is to not focus on the round leading up to it. What do I mean by this? So, for example, it is very common for debaters who are going for SSDC. So the rounds are usually on Friday evening, and they stress out the whole day because they're constantly thinking about the round at the end of the day. They think about it on the bus, on the way to the venue. They think about it while in their canteen, waiting for the round. And then by the time they've gotten to the debate room, they are so stressed out that they cannot perform. So you can do very simple things. Just do anything you can to take your mind off the debate leading up to the round. If it's an impromptu round, okay, and you're waiting for the next round to start, Don't focus on it. Don't think about it. Don't think about who your opponents might be. Don't think about what the motion might be. Don't think about the possibility of losing. Don't think about how many points you need to win to break. Focus on calming yourself down through either listening to music, watching videos, talking to your friends. Don't focus on the next round. When the motion comes out and when prep time starts, that is when you focus on prepping and just focus on delivering your speech. Okay? The next way to get around anxiety is to create patterns of behavior and to make giving speeches a habit. Debating becomes less stressful and less anxiety-inducing the more you do it. Because the more familiar you are, the more situations you've seen and encountered, the less unknown there is. And that is why you become less anxious, because you know what to expect. You know what happens in a debate. You know how you react to certain situations. So in fact, probably giving this lecture is a lot more stressful for me compared to giving a debate speech. I can give a debate speech like that, like easy, without thinking too much about it, because I've done it like hundreds of times over the years. I haven't delivered online lectures at all, or rarely rather, right? So it's just familiarity with what you need to do and the process of a debate, right? So, okay, give me a sec. Okay. Yeah, Joe, I'll answer that question later. The next type of anxiety, so like if you have clinical anxiety, right, like really bad panic attacks and public speaking, debating makes it worse. My advice is this: treat it like any other sports injury you would have. If you have a knee injury, get that knee rehabilitated first before trying to play basketball. If you have elbow injury, do not slow down on playing tennis. Do not play tennis competitively. You might be able to play tennis a bit, but take it slow. I've seen people, right, with clinical anxiety or other issues try to push through it, and it destroys them because they think pushing through it works. You need to get those issues sorted out first before trying to get involved in a competitive activity that enhances the anxiety or triggers the anxiety, right? It is exactly the same like any other sports injury. No one would force you or expect you to debate or to play a sport while you are injured. The solution is always to get the injury rectified, because the injury could turn out to be something long-term. And if it's long-term, you probably need to find a different sport that takes stress away from that injury. And that's the same thing here, right? If anxiety is something you struggled with your entire life, you might want to debate recreationally, right? You might want to just do sparring sessions or do online debates or written debates. And there are multiple alternatives for you. Or participate in like essay competitions where you have to write arguments and things like that. Okay? There are alternatives that you should explore. Debating is not the be all and end all of competitive behavior. I know you might like it, but if you have some sort of issue that is hampering you, don't make it worse by forcing yourself through it. Right? It's okay. No one's going to judge you for it, because people get injured in sports all the time. And if debating is a mental sport, if you have issues with your mental state, you cannot exacerbate it through debating. It's going to get worse. Last thing, right? Tilt. So we talked about this tilt. So the tilt is just a general broad concept to like negative emotions. So you have self-induced tilt versus like opponent-induced tilt. Self-induced tilt is when you tilt yourself, or like you focus on your mistakes and you focus on your losses up to a point where you just prevent yourself from making optimal decisions during the next debate. This often happens when you take a bad loss or you've just had a bad debate experience and you're moving on to the next round. There are two things you need to do. First and foremost, most importantly, you need to recognize when you are tilted, right? And take moments, take time away to calm yourself down and to chill out, right? I can't say what to do to chill yourself out. That's highly dependent on you as an individual, but you know yourself best, and you have to develop strategies to take yourself out of that negative mindset. All right. If you have to take a breather, go somewhere else, buy a drink, get some food, whatever, take your mind off that debate and try to untilt, basically. Okay. What about opponent-induced tilt? So opponents obviously will try to tilt you. Some opponents do. Okay. You need to recognize when they're doing, and this goes back to the earlier advice about understanding your opponents and the tactics that they use all the time, right? And be mentally prepared or devise strategies for dealing with those tactics, right? If they're loud and aggressive, you can tell them to tone it down. If they make sarcastic jokes or they make fun of you, tease you during the debate, either if it's an equity violation, lodge a complaint. But if it's like either ignore it or prepare lines to go back after them, right? Don't buy into that that tilt and buy into those emotions, because that's exactly what they want you to do. Okay. Oh, I'm running out of time. Okay. So I'm going to talk about a couple of other things with psychological traps. So let's talk about like suboptimal mental state during competition. Okay, I've talked a bit about dealing with losses. I'll just explain fatigue during a tournament. If you are debating in a weekend tournament, okay, and you are doing, so let's say it's a small tournament, there are 4 prelim rounds, and you make it deep into the tournament, you realize you are debating anywhere between 4 to 8 rounds over the course of a weekend. And it's extremely taxing because your mind is operating at 100% during the debate, right? It's going as fast as possible. In order to minimize fatigue, you need to only exert energy during the debate. And outside of the debate, minimize all energy expenditure. Okay? What do I mean by this? So after a debate, don't talk to your friends about the debate. Don't talk to other people about the debate. Recounting the debate and bringing up the emotions associated with the debate about the arguments or thinking about yourself in a excitable, high energy state contributes to that fatigue. So fatigue, sit down, chill, listen to music, take a nap. Some people take naps in between rounds, right? But don't do anything that's too exciting, basically. Other ways to deal with fatigue, and for some reason, debaters still neglect this, things like sleep, eating proper food, making sure you are not pumping yourself full of sugar. The same basic concepts that apply in any sport apply here in ensuring their energy levels remain constant, ensuring that you aren't sleep deprived. So try to sleep earlier the night of a tournament. So there are very simple tips that you can do to ensure that your mental state is as sharp as possible. Don't think about losses. Make sure you are chill. Okay. Now, let's talk about ego within debaters, or basically anyone, really. Now, I know the word ego has a generally negative connotation. Ego is bad. I don't think all ego is bad. Some ego is good, or some types of ego is good. What do I mean by this? There is a difference between a competitive ego and like arrogance. Okay? The difference is simple. Competitive ego basically is an unwavering belief that I am capable of great things. A bad ego, or like being arrogant, is saying, I deserve great things. Note the difference here. One is a statement on your capacity, your capabilities. The second is a sense of entitlement. So what you want to do is you want to develop your ability to believe in yourself and your capabilities, and that you are able to achieve things. You're able to win debates. Okay. Anytime you think a win should automatically come to you, that you deserve it, you are going down the wrong path. And many debaters fall into that trap because they get good, and therefore they think that they deserve wins all the time because they've already gotten good or gotten some results, right? So you want to avoid that trap, because if you think you deserve great things, you often don't focus on the things that you've done wrong or the mistakes you've made. If you think that I am capable of great things, that allows you to realize I am capable of it here at some point in the future, but I'm just not doing it right now. So I need to figure out, how do I maximize my potential? How do I maximize my capacity to do well? And that brings me nicely to the last thing, right? So competitive mindset, developing a desire to win and managing it. Okay. So I know there's some reluctance by like debaters, coaches, teachers to place an emphasis on winning, primarily because they feel it takes away from learning important life skills in a debate. I don't think it's mutually exclusive, and I don't think aiming to win is necessarily a bad thing. And the answer is very simple. The reason for this is very simple. Because you are a competitive debater. You are participating in a competition to be competitive. Winning is the objective in a competition. In fact, not aiming to win in a competition is counterproductive, because you participate in a competition, but there's no hope for a potential reward. And you just feel bad for losing over and over again. Then you start to question why you even put yourself through this. So say you play Scrabble, for example. You can play for fun with your friends. If you want to improve your vocabulary through playing Scrabble, you will definitely have those gains over time. But if you compare playing with your friends to going for a competition where you aim to do your best, you aim to beat your opponents, there is a much stronger impetus, because you have to maximize the amount of words you can remember, because you're going to face a much wider range of competitors than just your friends that you may beat regularly. So a desire to win in a competition actually pushes you to learn and master those skills a lot more, right? Having no desire to win actually can breed complacency, and you might not actually start learning skills. I'm not saying you don't learn at all, but you don't maximize your learning capacity because there are no stakes, right? There are no consequences you don't learn. The consequence is you feel have a bit of heart pain when you lose, right? That's the consequence. So I'm not saying that competition is the only way to get benefits out of debating, or that competitive debaters are better, okay? But when you sign up for a competition, or you sign your students up for competition, whether you join or you create a competitive debating club, you need to ask yourself, what is your objective? So if I'm trying to get fit or learn the game of basketball because I'm super passionate about it, I love the sport, right? I can play with my friends regularly and achieve these goals. But at the point in which I choose to join an amateur league or to go for some 3v3 competition, that no longer becomes my only objective, because there are also lessons to be learned by being competitive and trying to win. So I'm far more likely to master basketball or even like debating skills by pursuing it at a high level in competition. So if you join a competition, aim to win. Okay? Believe that you are capable of winning and aim for it. You don't have to aim to win the competition you're in right now, because you could just be starting out. But if you're in competitive debating, you have to at least aim to win more debates in the next competition, or in competitions next year, or in 5 years from now. That gives you very clear and measurable goals to strive towards and creates benchmarks for improvement. So again, I want to point out, aiming to win does not mean aiming to be champion all the time. Most of us do not become debating champions, because in a team of like 40, 80, in a tournament of like 40 to 80 teams, one team can become champion, right? But you can aim to win in other ways. You can aim to break. You can aim to maybe make the semifinals, or even just aim to win the next debate round. But every debate you participate in, you should just aim to win. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about with regards to this is that developing this competitive mindset is actually important to life, because everywhere you go, you need to learn to compete and win, be it in an exam, at a scholarship interview, when applying for a job. Every time there's a scarcity of opportunity, you have to compete for it. You have to compete other people for it, because many people want the same opportunity, but there are only so few of it. You fight for it. You climb over other people to get that opportunity. Learning to deal with the stress of trying to win and the pain of losing and the pain of failure will equip you for every other competition in life. If you just soothe yourself by saying, oh, I'm just here to learn, it's not enough, because eventually there will be a competition that you can't afford to lose. So now let's talk about stories. Okay, I actually had two stories, but because we're running out of time, I'll just talk about one. Right. So I'm not going to be super detailed about the circumstances, because this story involves my students and their opponents, and I don't think it's very nice to publicly air what was wrong or what the mistakes my opponents did, or rather attribute those mistakes to very specific people, right? But here's the context, okay? It's the finals of a major tournament, like sometime in the past, for my students, and it's a prepared motion on US politics. Okay, so it's a finals. So if we apply the lessons that we've learned today, right? So let's look at three broad categories. Let's first look at the opponent. So let me tell you about the opponent. The opponent was an extremely strong team. Okay, they've competed against my students I coached multiple times, and they've beaten them on a few occasions. They are generally very accomplished. More importantly, one person on that team was supremely talented. Like it's what he like this person was one of the best, if not the best debaters in that batch, and definitely one of the best debaters I've seen at that age in a long time. Right? So I knew this person was very confident in their abilities and had a bit of an ego, right? Probably warranted, because given how good that person was. So it was a tough matchup. I also knew this person loved to provide very complex responses to their opponents and attempt to completely destroy their arguments, because they could. However, I also knew that this person, this team, and their coach didn't know as much about US politics as I do. So we had an advantage in terms of knowledge. Okay, they had an advantage in terms of skill, pure skill. They, very good. But in particular, this one opponent. What about the judges? So because of the prepared round, I was preparing way in advance of the round. I didn't know who the judges would be on the day itself, but I did know it was a finals. That means you will often put your most experienced judges in that finals. So I knew the judges would be quite a bit older and very experienced. And probably they will have similar levels of knowledge on US politics as I did. So I can give a lot of examples, a lot of very specific contextual situations within the case, right? And my students can deliver that. For my students, on the other hand, they have been aiming to win this competition for a long time, right? So I knew they would be very worried about losing and the fear of losing, because their last opportunity to participate in this one competition, right? More importantly, I knew they would be worried about losing to this particular opponent, because this opponent has beaten them before. This one person, right? Like really crushed them in previous debates, right? Over a year ago. So what was my game plan? So now that I knew all these factors, what game plan did I create and how did I implement it? So the game plan actually started months ago before the competition because I made this one opponent a key focus in our championship campaign. I constantly told my team about what this opponent was doing, how this opponent was training. I made this one person a target for my team. All the while, just encouraging them, telling them it's possible to catch up or at least close the gap in ability. Or if all of them improved, even if no one of them was better than this one person, as a team, they will be stronger. All right. And in particular, I actually goaded, like I poked my strongest speaker on the team to match up with this person all the time. Like I constantly compared them together because I knew this my strongest speaker could handle it, okay, mentally. As for the debate itself, because it was prepared, we could construct a game plan for this opponent. So they were proposition and we were opposition. So I knew this opponent would probably do second speaker and reply because for a few reasons. First speaker is very easy to script. It doesn't make sense to put your strongest speaker in first. All right. And giving this person, this strong opponent, very strong opponent, 2 opportunities to speak in a debate is a significant advantage because they do second speaker and reply, right? So that was probably the lineup. So I did a couple of things. Number one, I moved my strongest speaker to second opposition. So my strongest speaker will be speaking after this person, okay? Second, we actually ran a very complicated decoy case in first opposition because I knew this strong opponent, okay, who is going second prop, will not be able to resist the bait. Remember, I talked about how they like to give very complex responses. So I ran a very complex decoy case in first op. Okay? So let me try and explain the case roughly. So on this particular motion on US politics, I can't say what the motion is, but an obvious op case would be to explain why the motion would not work or would fail to operate. Okay? I know that sounds like a bad case. In most debates, it is. Explaining why the motion will not work or fail to operate. But that's the obvious op given the phrasing of the motion. So it's not a great case, but this particular motion called for it. But because we knew it was obvious, I knew this opponent and this strong debater would be prepared for it. So what we did is we sold the lie that we were all in on that case during that first speaker, okay? And we focused completely on it. The POIs were also geared towards focusing on that case. More importantly, we made that case that the motion will not work very complex and multi-layered, okay? So I think there were like 6-7 points crammed in there. Because this strong opponent would try to respond to everything and everything with multiple rebuttals, imagine if I cram 6 or 7 points in a speech and they had multiple responses, they will have like 18 easily within their speech. There's just not enough time, right? That's just impossible to do for them because we had 1 week to prepare, to cram, to optimize the speech, right? To create every single layer and make sure it all fits together very nicely. The opponent has 6 minutes when they listen to the speech during the finals. So this opponent couldn't develop their own case during the speech. And I knew because they had things that they also wanted to say, they will continue focusing it on reply. So what happened in my second op speech with my stronger speaker, the case shifted. Okay, it didn't contradict, it shifted. We had a different focus, right? So it functioned on the premise that the motion would work. Let's assume the motion works. What then is the problem, right? So I knew their third speaker wouldn't recognize that change. And this strong opponent who went second and reply would tunnel vision so much on our initial attacks and ignore what my second speaker had said, right? Because they just weren't able to cover everything they wanted to. Also, I took into account the fact that judges were very experienced. So we could get away with very complex cases with a lot of moving parts, right? With a lot of things interwoven and very specific contextual examples because I knew they would catch everything. And the opposing coach would not have prepared for for that sort of case because of a gap in knowledge. Like I knew the coach knew less than me. That's how you exploit everyone's tendencies in a debate to win a championship. So it's just over an hour and a half. We'll do a few questions. I'll try my best to answer as many as possible. Okay, so first question Joe just sent me. In terms of trying to play your opponent's mindset within the debate, I've received contrasting pieces of advice. Some people tell me to be really aggressive and enter the room with the objective of stressing opponents out, like AlphaGo, while others say it's better to be very gentle and kill them with content, like VR. Which strategy is better, if at all? Wow, great question. Okay. My answer is that it depends. So if I would suggest trying both things out, if you're very good at delivering content, right, and cramming a lot of responses. So like Viha in particular, brilliant third speaker, and her responses are supremely sharp. Like she would tear down she would single-handedly demolish an opponent's case. And she doesn't have to be super aggressive about it because her responses are so like precise and cutting edge. Okay, so she doesn't need to do these things because she has a significant advantage over most speakers, particularly when she's going third whip or third speaker or whip in a 3-on-3 format, right? If you can get an easy win just by being aggressive and stressing opponents out, do it. If that works more often, do it. So remember, this goes back to the original point that I made about what exactly is the point of understanding psychology and debating. You do not neglect basic skills. So Viha's approach is focusing on the fundamentals. This amplifies things. Sometimes your fundamentals can be so strong that you just straight up win the debate. But that isn't the case for many of us. So this can help cover some gaps or cover some mistakes. Can you rely on stressing your opponents out all the time and winning debates? No. Especially if you have weak fundamentals. So really the approach is a mix between the two. Whether you want to focus on one or the other depends. Granted, these are things that I used a lot more when I was younger as a debater myself. And I don't rely on these things as much. I mean, I rely on studying my judges, really. My opponents, not so much. But that's because I have a base level of knowledge and skill, right? Okay. Give me a sec. Let me just open. Oh. Okay, I guess this works. Joe, is it fine if I just open the doc here and continue sharing screen? Joe?
Yeah, maybe don't show the questions.
Okay. Is it still here? Is it still showing?
No, it's not showing anymore.
Okay, great. Okay. Okay, so is observation the key to knowing your opponent's strategic tendencies? Yes. Observation, you do. I mean, you can rely on third-hand information like what people tell you or what your coaches tell you, but it's always good to focus on observing yourself and observing people in general. In fact, observation is a extremely useful skill in life. You can always figure out what other people in the room in a conversation with you are thinking. You can react to those situations a lot better, right? So I personally in life have always had a habit of watching people and watching how they behave, watching what they say, how they say it, and figuring out why they say it or why they behave a certain way, right? And I do this all the time. It's something I can't really turn off. Obviously, this gives me a huge advantage in games like poker, but it's helped me in debating as well because I've used my observational skills to form certain conclusions about opponents or judges. What is a rough guide? What is appropriate for tilting? I am not sure what this question means. I would assume this question is, how do you tilt your opponents? Okay. I mean, I gave some examples where you POI them a bit aggressively, you make sarcastic jokes, but the rule of thumb is don't break the rules, don't make an equity violation. Everything else, fair game, right? Joke you might make before the round, trash talk before the round. There's no equity violation. Everything else is fair game, right? Does tilting them also mean you're using their feelings against them? Yes. Tilting them means that you're using their feelings against them because they being tilted makes them perform worse and increases your odds of winning, right? Do win rates affect edges judgment for better or worse? Yes, right? So if an opponent is very dominant and winning all the tournaments, it is likely that judges are going to continue giving them the win, right? This goes back to the idea of how judges have preconceived notions of you and your abilities, right? So they also have preconceived notions of star debaters. In fact, we have this term or at least older debaters use this term. We call it star power, right? A judge goes in the room and sees a star debater and like, wow, and then they automatically give them the win. This happens often enough. I have both been on the losing end of it as well as the receiving end of it. So like there are times where I walk into a debate, I just say random stuff and I get the win. And I know it's because the judge is just impressed with me and likes me as a debater. And it's just part and parcel of any sport which is being judged by people, right? That doesn't mean you cannot get there. It just means you need to work a lot harder and it's easier to stay at the top once you get there. Okay? It's just the nature of the sport. Don't get disheartened. Obviously, all-star debaters were lousy scrubs at one point or time in another, and they were on the receiving end of it and getting losses. So it's very possible for you to eventually do better and to get those wins. But that being said, if you just focus on fundamentals, focus on debate skills, right, and be good, just be way better, it is hard for someone to be that biased to ignore skill. It is entirely possible for pure skill to be so good that no judge can be biased against you. It is possible, right? So you need to think about that. And if it's always possible for you to improve in terms of skill, focus on that. Don't get disheartened by the fact that other people are winning more and therefore the judge gives them the win. What is stagnating? Stagnating means reaching a plateau. So improvement if you talk about the rate of improvement does not work linearly, right? Which is a straight line. Okay. In fact, it doesn't even work like exponentially where it goes like a curve. What happens is you have sharp spikes in improvement because you learn a skill, right? And then as you try and you learn and incorporate a new skill, and then you often plateau for a while you're trying to learn a new skill and incorporate it. So part and parcel of like incorporating new techniques is sometimes you actually do a bit worse. All right. So even though you've improved, but because you are trying out new things, you do a bit worse. So you stagnate for a while, right? And debaters often get frustrated at this point when they stagnate. They get frustrated with their performances in training and in tournaments. And that's why knowing when someone is stagnating can actually give you a clue. Are they very upset when they lose, right? How do you make friends in the circuit? I can literally count my debate friends with my 4 limbs. That means you might have 20 friends actually. So that's good. How do you make friends in the circuit? Talk to people. Be nice to people. I mean, you can obviously a lot of the things that I've said, tilting your opponents and being aggressive and stuff, happen during the debate. Outside the debate, you can be nice to them and you can talk to them, right? Find out about their lives, find out about what they're doing in debate, find out about their hobbies, play games with them, like do other things, go out for a meal, things like that, right? Talk to judges, right? Most people are quite friendly if you talk to them. Do most judges have the same mindset? I don't understand what this question means. Do most judges have the same mindset? I think what you're trying to say is that are judges similar? And if that's the question, no. Broad categories of judges, they do have similar mindsets within those categories, but not all judges have the same mindset. What's the typical mindset of the judge is very specific to the judge you're talking about. How do we analyze a judge's mindset? After all, not all have the same. So what should we do? Ask yourself, is the judge inexperienced? Where did the judge debate? How does the judge debate? What sort of styles do they like? What sort of arguments do they like? If they've given you feedback or like reasons for a loss and they've penalized you for specific things that you've done wrong in the debate, you now know that they prioritize those things and they think those things are important, right? If they penalize you for mistakes but didn't penalize your opponents for other mistakes, you now know which mistakes they find more important or find more damaging in the debate, right? So that's how you think about judges' mindsets in general. So the tough answer is this is something you do with experience and just going for more and more competitions and seeing more and more judges and watching them and listening to them. It's not something you are going to immediately get off the bat. I mean, a lot of the things in this lecture is not exactly for novice new debaters, but it will help you in the long run if you plan to be competitive. How do we change our speech instantly to suit the judge? We usually only see the judge after prep. You do realize that if you see the judge after prep, between the time the judge walks into a room and the time you start your speech, if your first proposition, you still have 2 to 5 minutes to change things in your speech. That's time, right? If you are not first proposition, you can have anywhere between 2 to 5 minutes plus like 6 minutes, however many speakers are there before you, right? So sometimes you can have anywhere upwards of like 40 minutes before you need to adjust your speech because you're going last. So you do have time to change your speech to suit judges. Do you recommend using weak and unexpected arguments that delivered nicely to shock the opponents or strong arguments? Okay. So the question is, let me repeat it again. Do you recommend using weak and unexpected arguments that delivered nicely to shock the opponents or strong and expected arguments? Let me be clear. Just because a case is unexpected does not mean it is weak. Generally, do not run weak arguments or weak cases. When I talk about delivering different types of cases, okay, and like obvious cases versus less obvious cases, often the reason why a particular case or a particular argument is obvious is because it is the strongest. So you need to recognize that arguments exist on a scale, okay, from strong to weak. Sometimes it might be useful to run less stronger arguments, not the strongest, to catch your opponents off guard. Okay? But you never want to run completely weak arguments. Okay? Your arguments still have to have validity and like it has to make sense. It has to help prove the motion and things like that. Okay? So you can run different arguments that are suboptimal, but because you know it catches your opponents off guard, and the deciding factor is, will you definitely for sure catch your opponents off guard. If your opponents can adapt, don't bother. Run the strongest arguments, run the most obvious arguments, right? So it's a very situational thing based on your read of the opponents. Okay, it's a similar concept to poker. Okay, if anyone understands how poker works, and bluffing in poker, so you do have nothing, you have no cards, you have a losing hand. Okay, if you decide to go all in on a bluff, okay, you only do that if you know for a fact by going all in your opponent is going to fall. If you know there is a possibility, and there's actually a decent possibility that your opponent is going to call, going all in on a bluff is a ridiculously bad move, and you do not want to do that. So there's just no point running weak arguments just because you think your opponent cannot respond. You have to have a very good educated guess that that's going to happen, and you just don't want to run weak arguments in general. Okay, what do you do if your team dynamics is not good? Wow, this is a whole lecture in and of itself. I'll try to give a short answer. You need to talk to your teammates. You need to talk to your teammates. If you have a coach, you need to talk to your coach or your teachers and try to get them to help you mediate. If you are an older debater, what often happens is people just quit on their team and find other teammates, but sometimes you don't have the luxury of doing that. So you need to have a long heart-to-heart talk with your teammates, and you need to understand that it's a process. So you cannot be aggressive in the way you deal with your teammates, but you need to understand and clearly explain to them outside of a debate competition. It cannot occur during a debate. It cannot occur during a debate competition. This has to occur during a sit-down session, and you have to talk to them and explain the behavior that's problematic, explain how it affects you, how it affects the team, and give them suggestions for what they can do as alternatives, right? So you cannot address these issues during a competition, okay? I've heard of and read up about the psychology of anyone can beat anyone, especially in BPs. Does this apply to 3v3 formats? Okay, wait, let me see. Okay, so I've heard of and read up on the psychology of anyone can beat anyone, especially in BPs. Does this also apply to 3v3 formats? Because usually it seems like you just end up being crushed down the bench, and even in BPs, extending behind fantastic teams is near impossible. How then am I supposed to keep myself motivated when I enter around and see Reuben Lopez in my room? Okay. Yes, anyone can beat anyone, especially even in 3v3 formats. Okay. And the reason for that is simple, is variance, right? So good debaters obviously reduce their variance because they're more familiar with more motions, they're more experienced, they know more situations, right? But even the best debaters have bad days, and they lose debates in ridiculous ways, right? Judges also matter. So yes, it does apply to 3v3 formats. So how am I supposed to keep myself motivated when I enter around and see insert good debater here? Okay, fine. If you go into the room with the mentality that I'm going up against a strong opponent and therefore I'm going to lose, you will lose. There's just no way around it. You will get crushed down the bench. You just cannot allow yourself to have that mindset and because your opponent isn't even doing anything to intimidate you. You are intimidating yourself, and that just becomes defeatist, right? You end up losing the debate without your opponents doing anything. And I've seen this all the time. Actually, it annoys me quite a bit when I go for tournaments, particularly like local tournaments. And debaters go up against me, and then they're like, "Oh, Reuben, wow, we're gonna lose." And I'm like, why do that? I would actually rather you go after me, so I feel pumped up. I feel a bit excited. But if you just roll over and die, I don't have to do very much to win the debate. right? So you're making my life easier, and I'm observing you. Even if you don't say that, I can see on your face, I can see in your eyes, right? So I know that, and if you believe it, then I know I can just slack off and just take an easy win, right? So if you go after me or any good debater, they can't slack off and they might make a mistake and slip up. And you need to wait for those mistakes because it doesn't matter how good a debater is. Like I'm decent. I'm not definitely not the best debater ever, right? Um, I make mistakes all the time, particularly now since I don't train very often, and I rarely speak in tournaments. I speak in tournaments like 2-3 times a year just to keep my mind sharp. So I make mistakes. You just have to look out for those mistakes. If you think you are going to lose, you are not looking out for mistakes I make or any other debater makes. Good debaters still make mistakes. No one delivers perfect speeches. Okay. In terms of dealing with losses, sometimes it isn't a bad round or bad corner necessarily, but a very basic mistake or a bunch of them that you end up making, which makes you want to harakiri. Okay. On a more serious note, it feels disheartening on another level to be making basic mistakes and losing out, such as prepping the wrong side or not reading the motion clearly, how to deal with such losses, which aren't necessarily anomalies. Okay. So the first thing you need to do is you need to be happy that you know you're making basic mistakes. Okay. The worst thing is you do not know what mistakes you're making. Then you just lose and you don't even understand why. So if you know that you're making mistakes and you understand what mistakes you're making, so if you're talking about basic mistakes like prepping the wrong side of motion or not reading motion clearly, you need to also recognize that everyone does this. Even as recently as last year, I did a tournament where I didn't read the motion clearly and I lost, right? Like, lost early in the tournament actually, like in the quarters or some octos. And it's just because I didn't read the motion very clearly. Everyone does this. The most experienced debaters do this. I have so many stories of debaters doing this, right? So what you need to do is then you need to come up with some strategy for avoiding that mistake. It's also because you know it's basic, it's also easy to fix. So for example, creating a mental checklist or even writing it at the top of your notes. Okay. Before you even prep a motion, you write it. Have you read the motion clearly? Do you understand every single term in the motion? Please reread the motion again. Okay. Double check which side you're on. Just going through that checklist helps in terms of fixing those basic mistakes. So the last thing is feeling bad about making those basic mistakes. I think the approach here is if you know there are basic mistakes, you need to take heart in the fact that they are easy to fix. So then you just need to move on and vow yourself, like write it on your forehead to not make those mistakes. So take comfort in the fact that the mistakes are easy to fix and you can fix them. So then let it go. Okay. So once you've developed a strategy, you implemented the strategy, forget about it. Forget about the loss. Right? It becomes easier to forget about it. Okay. It's now 4. I'm just going to give like 30 seconds for anyone to type out like questions very quickly. You can do it in the chat, you can do it in the Google form, anything very quickly. Any other questions?
You may unmute yourself now and ask Reuben any questions.
Okay, I'm going to assume there are no more questions. Let me refresh the page one more time. Yeah, okay. So I guess let's call it a day. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk, coming to my rant. If you have any questions later on, you can feel free to email me. I think Joel can share my email. Or you can approach me at any tournament, really. And I will be happy to sit down and have a conversation with you when I have the time. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Bye.